If you think betrayal hurts, try being stabbed in the back by your own brother, and then realizing the knife was handed to him by your wife. This isn't just a story about a broken family or a toxic marriage. It's about years of quiet suffering, deep scars hidden behind forced smiles, and the kind of betrayal that rewrites everything you thought you knew about love, loyalty, and blood. What happened to me isn't fiction. And by the end of it, you'll either be speechless or furious on my behalf. Why brother slept with my wife. And the child I raised isn't mine. When I exposed the truth, he lost everything. The family, the money, and every last bit of respect. I've got a younger brother named Ryan. And to be completely honest, the guy's resented me deeply for as long as I can remember. Now, if you're thinking maybe he resented me because I was the golden child or something, nope, you'd be dead wrong. I wasn't the favorite. He was. Let me explain a bit. Our mom treated Ryan like he walked on water. He was the one she doted on, the so-called golden boy of the family. She'd cook his meals, wash his clothes, and even wrote me into helping him with his homework. It was just expected of me. Help your brother, he's family, but nobody ever asked him to return the favor. That kind of support was a one-way street. I guess I didn't raise much of a fuss back then. I was always more self-reliant anyway. Maybe, in a way, I set myself up for it by constantly giving in and never asking for much in return. Ryan never offered help when I needed it. The only time he reached out was when he wanted something from me. Growing up, I was the quiet, studious type. Introverted, kept to myself, liked things calm. Ryan was the complete opposite. He was loud, abrasive, just like our dad. I've always been pretty direct. I say what I mean, no sugarcoating, and I think that rubbed Mom the wrong way early on. Maybe she saw that as being cold or difficult. Whatever it was, she seemed to form a negative opinion of me when I was still a kid. Meanwhile, Ryan could do no wrong in her eyes. He was the family's favorite, hands down. I didn't care all that much when we were kids. I could live with not being the favorite. What really messed me up was how Ryan started treating me over time. He'd go out of his way to mock me for being different, whether it was my height or the fact that I wore glasses. He even snuck into my room and tried to read my diary, just so he could tattle on me to Mom. I'd lose it, yelling at him and going straight to my parents to complain about how he was invading my space. But instead of backing me up, they'd just laugh like it was some harmless prank. That's just how brothers bond, Mom would say. Except it wasn't harmless. He got meaner. One time he almost broke my glasses. Another time he messed with my food. I'll never forget the morning I found little stones in my cereal. Yeah, actual rocks. I caught them before I bit down, thank God, or I could have cracked a tooth, I told Mom. But again, she brushed it off like it was no big deal. Boys will be boys, she said. Every time we argued, Ryan would throw my insecurities back in my face, like he had a checklist of things that hurt me most. We went to the same school, and he knew damn well I was getting bullied by a couple of guys. Instead of standing up for me, he joined them, calling me names like weird kid, or calling me names and egging them on to mess with me physically. To him, I was nothing but a joke, a screw-up. There was this one fight. I don't even remember what sparked it, probably something petty. And at the end of it, he looked me dead in the eye and told me to hurt myself. Most of his insults rolled off me eventually, but that one stuck. It hit hard, especially because I was already battling some serious mental health stuff back then. I'm doing a lot better these days, but man, hearing something like that from your own brother, it just breaks something in you. Dad wasn't around much, always working, and Mom didn't seem too concerned. In fact, she once yelled at me, saying I was the one to blame for poking and annoying Ryan into reacting. Things just kept spiraling from there. When we were both in high school, he actually tried to harm me. And what did Mom do? She took his side. She kept insisting he was just playing around. But seriously, who messes around like that? Lighting someone's hair on fire? That's not a joke, it's dangerous. Thankfully, my dad finally stepped in and took my side. He told Ryan straight up that this behavior was way out of line, and if it kept going, he'd call the police. That moment really opened Ryan's eyes. Up to that point, he'd never been disciplined for anything. He was totally caught off guard. Dad told him enough was enough. It was time to grow up and start showing respect to his older brother. Later that evening, Dad came into my room to talk. Honestly, I didn't expect that from him. Growing up, he always told Ryan how alike they were, and they really were similar in a lot of ways. But this time, Dad told me he'd spent years being patient, assuming Ryan was just an immature kid who'd eventually grow out of it. Now, though, he was starting to see that Ryan had turned into a straight-up bully. Hearing that made me feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Validated. I was holding back tears as I opened up to him. I told him everything Ryan had done to me over the years, and even shared what had been happening at school. I told him about the bullying and how hard it had been. Dad was shocked. He hadn't realized I'd been going through all that. The very next day, he went to school and spoke with the principal, warning the kids who had been picking on me that there'd be serious consequences if it continued. That evening, he also signed me up for MMA at our local gym. He told me it was time I learned how to stand up for myself. I had to man up and deal with the bullies in my life. I know, the image of a nerdy kid like me learning how to fight probably sounds ridiculous, and maybe it was. But when I decide to do something, I go all in. I managed my time so I could still focus on school while going to MMA classes every day. Not to brag, but it changed everything. My mindset, my confidence, and yeah, even my body. Then one day, Ryan pushed me too far again. We used to get a little pocket money if we helped out around the house, and I had been saving mine for a while. Ryan snuck into my room and stole it. I caught him just as he was about to ride off on his bike with his friends. I told him firmly to give it back. I reminded him that stealing is wrong, and he knew it. But he just smirked and said something like, "What are you gonna do? Go cry to Daddy again." I don't know what came over me, but I punched him, hard, right in the face. He stumbled back and hit the ground, completely shocked. I walked over, pulled my money out of his pocket, and tossed him back down. Ryan started bawling like a baby. It was actually kind of funny seeing a teenage boy crying like that on the sidewalk. Then Mom came running out of the house. As soon as she saw Ryan on the ground, she rushed to help him up and asked what had happened. When she found out I had hit him, she looked stunned, then turned to me and started yelling. She said I was the older brother, and I should be setting a better example. Ryan looked smug, like he was enjoying seeing me get scolded. Mom later complained to Dad about what I'd done, how I had beaten up Ryan and needed to be disciplined. But Dad didn't just take her word for it. He sat both of us down and asked us to explain what happened. I told him the truth. Ryan had stolen the money I'd worked hard to earn and save. Ryan tried to justify it, saying he needed it for a date and that, as his brother, I should have just helped him out. Dad didn't let that fly. He told Ryan he was lucky that I only punched him, because if it were someone else, he might have ended up in handcuffs. He reminded Ryan that you don't take what doesn't belong to you, especially not without asking. Ryan didn't take that well. He started throwing a fit, clearly hoping Mom would jump in again. But Dad didn't budge. And when Ryan saw that, I didn't get punished for hitting him, and honestly, that felt like a turning point. Ryan screamed about how much he hated me, then stormed off and locked himself in his room. After that, he kept his distance. It was like he finally realized that he couldn't push me around anymore. And with Dad no longer backing up his nonsense, Ryan's power trip had finally hit a wall. For the first time in forever, I felt like we were on the same level. Sure, he couldn't touch me physically anymore, but he still tried to get under my skin whenever he could. He'd mutter nasty things to me when our parents weren't around, always trying to sneak in a jab when no one else could hear. As he got older, it only got worse. Each year, he seemed more bitter, more short-tempered. If I asked him something, he wouldn't even look at me, just turned and walked out of the room, mumbling stuff like loser or nerd under his breath. If he needed to say something to me, he wouldn't speak to me directly. Instead, he'd go through our mom like I was some stranger he couldn't bear to address himself. I started asking her why he couldn't just talk to me like a normal person. She'd just sigh and tell me to be more patient, more understanding. I honestly didn't know if this was just some weird phase or if he actually, genuinely despised me. I used to be able to brush it off, let it roll off my back. But at some point, it just wore me down. I reached a point where I seriously started thinking about leaving home. Not because I wanted freedom or independence like most teens do, but because I needed to escape him. I begged my mom more than once to help us sit down and talk things out. I just wanted a real conversation, some closure, anything. But she always refused. Said she didn't want to get involved. When I tried to ask her why he treated me like that, why he hated me so much, she dodged the question or changed the subject. Eventually, I left for college. I got into my dream school, top of my class, full scholarship. Dad even threw a party for me, and Mom looked genuinely proud. But Ryan? He couldn't have cared less. He barely acknowledged I was leaving, let alone that I'd accomplished something huge. When I finally moved out, it was this mix of nerves and hope and pure relief. I couldn't wait to see what life was like away from all the toxicity I'd grown up with. Those first few months at university were everything I needed. I made great friends, actually enjoyed my classes, and for the first time in a long time, I could breathe. No more walking on eggshells, no more verbal attacks. Just peace. It was during my second year that I met Karen, my future wife. One of my buddies introduced us at a frat party, and we hit it off immediately. She was smart, grounded, beautiful, the whole package. We were both from pretty traditional backgrounds, and in our families, having kids before marriage wasn't exactly smiled upon. So when we found out she was pregnant during our final year, we didn't waste any time. We got married right after graduation. It was a small wedding, nothing flashy, but it felt right. Our parents were happy, and we were happy. At that time, I really believed she was it for me. The one. I'd always wanted a committed, monogamous life. Just one woman, one home, one story to build together. And no matter who came along or tried to flirt, I never once looked twice. I was all in. Karen felt like my dream girl, and I never wanted to hurt her, not in any way. But that dream didn't last forever. Over the years, I found out she had deceived me not once, but twice. The first was a drawn-out situation, an on-again, off-again thing she had with one of her married coworkers. It went on for years. The second was a short-term relationship with one of her exes. She had reconnected with that ex from high school during a trip to visit her family a few states away. Looking back, I know there are people who'd probably say I was naive, and honestly, they wouldn't be wrong. I've thought the same about myself plenty of times. Both times I found out about her betrayal, we went through a rough patch, took some space, and yet, I still chose to forgive her. I didn't want my kid growing up in a broken home. I truly believed we could work through it. When the whole thing with her coworker came out, we were still pretty young. I chalked it up to immaturity, poor judgment, not thinking things through. For a while after that, things seemed okay between us. I'll admit, I never fully got my trust back, but I pushed my doubts down as best I could. If I was going to forgive her, then I had to actually try to move forward, give us a fresh start. It's been 4 years since that second instance of betrayal, and for a long time, I thought I'd made the right call. Karen seemed different. We were genuinely happy, making plans for our future together as a family. But then, 3 months ago, everything came crashing down again. This time, it was worse, so much worse than anything before. She sat me down and told me she'd been sleeping with someone else for a while. And then she dropped the real bomb. Our son might not even be mine. Hearing that felt like the floor collapsed beneath me. My mind went blank with shock. I was frozen, trying to process the weight of what she'd just said. Deception doesn't even begin to describe it. It was like my entire reality flipped upside down. In the days that followed, I tried to make sense of it. I kept asking her why she would keep something so massive from me. How could she do something so destructive and not even flinch? But her reaction, it was cold, emotionless. Like she wasn't even affected by how much pain she'd caused. Her answers were vague, like she didn't care enough to explain. That made it worse, the indifference. I felt like a stranger in my own life, standing there with a family I suddenly didn't recognize. Still, I kept pressing her. I deserved the truth. I had raised our son from day one, changed diapers, stayed up through sleepless nights, taught him to ride a bike. I needed to know who his biological father was. Eventually, she told me. It was Ryan. I just stood there, stunned. My heart stopped. I asked her what the hell she meant. I thought maybe I'd misheard. That's when Karen told me everything. How it all started years ago, back when I first brought her home for Thanksgiving to meet my family. She had stayed with us through New Year's. I remembered that time. Ryan, who was normally cold toward everyone, especially me, had been surprisingly polite and even warm toward her. At the time, I was relieved. I didn't want Karen to feel unwelcome, and I figured maybe he was just trying to make a good impression. Karen wanted to be accepted by my family, so she spent a lot of time with my mom, helping out, chatting, being involved. She picked up on the tension between Ryan and me right away. She asked why we weren't close, and eventually, I opened up. I told her the truth, how our relationship had always been broken, how he couldn't let go of whatever resentment he carried. She said she understood. But then, little by little, she started bringing Ryan along when we made plans, like she thought if we just spent time together, maybe we'd mend things. If we were going to the movies, she'd invite Ryan too. And suddenly we were watching whatever movie he wanted. Ryan always picked the movie, of course. Still, during that time, he and I started exchanging a few words here and there. which, considering how he'd ignored me for years, was actually a big improvement. I remember Karen and Ryan playing video games together now and then, but I didn't think much of it at the time. Karen later told me that one day Ryan had opened up to her, told her about the breakup he was going through and how lost he felt. She said he was really vulnerable, and that's how their friendship started. According to her, it was innocent at first, but then she admitted that when I wasn't around, he'd flirt with her, supposedly just joking around, until it wasn't. She claimed one thing led to another, and eventually, she just couldn't control herself anymore. The moment she said that, I closed my eyes, trying not to throw up. Just the image of my wife and my brother together made me sick to my stomach. She told me she was overwhelmed with guilt after it happened and left immediately. She ran back home, and that tracked, because I remembered how suddenly she'd told me she wanted to leave after Christmas. I had thought we'd spend New Year's together, but she insisted she had to go. I tried to convince her to stay, but she wouldn't budge. When we saw each other again at college after the break, she acted completely normal, cheerful, like nothing had happened. I didn't question it at the time. Then, 2 weeks later, we found out she was pregnant. Now Karen was telling me she didn't know if the baby was mine or Ryan's. She said there was no way to prove it, but because I had stepped up and taken responsibility, and because between the two of us I was the dependable one, she chose to stay with me. That was the real reason we got married. It felt like my entire life was falling apart. I had spent years pouring my heart into fatherhood, loving a boy who might not even be mine. I asked her if she and Ryan were still sleeping together. She didn't even speak, just gave a small, guilty nod. Then she confessed that they had kept in touch this whole time, that there had always been a spark between them. She told me how they would meet up in secret, sneak off to hotels while she lied to me, saying she had to work late. She admitted that half the business trips she took were really just romantic getaways with Ryan. I asked her why she even bothered being married to me if Ryan was the one she really wanted. Karen said she never wanted to be the one who broke up a marriage. And since I'd been such a good father, she convinced herself to stay. According to her, it all started with one mistake, and she didn't know how to stop. I looked at her and simply said I was glad she finally told me the truth, but I was done. I told her I was going to pack my things and leave. Karen broke down crying, begging me to forgive her. She said she expected me to scream, to lose my mind, but instead I was calmly packing a suitcase. She followed me to the closet, sobbing as I gathered my clothes, repeating how if I really loved her, I'd fight for her. That people mess up in marriages, that mistakes happen. But when she realized I wasn't saying a word, she changed tactics. She started pleading for the sake of our son, saying a divorce would ruin him, that kids shouldn't grow up in broken homes. I turned to her and reminded her that I might not even be his father. That hit her like a punch. She fell apart completely, crying, yelling, accusing me of being heartless. She shouted about how I could just walk away so easily after being there for our son since the beginning. It honestly felt like Karen believed there was nothing I could ever do that would make me walk away from our marriage. And maybe that was partly my fault. I'd let too much slide over the years. I did still have some love for her, but looking back, I think most of it came from believing we had a son together and from the fact that we'd been through so much since our college days. Karen kept insisting it wasn't too late for us, that we could fix things. But I couldn't buy into that anymore. I didn't have the patience left to keep pretending we could go back to normal. Trust was everything to me, and hers had been completely shattered. Her words didn't mean anything anymore, not after what she'd done. Even if I could somehow forgive her, I knew I'd never forget that she was involved with my own brother. I've always believed that people mess up, that they deserve second chances. But this went beyond anything I could look past. I left her crying on the front steps and checked into a hotel for the night. The next morning, I went to my parents' house and told them everything, the entire truth. I laid it out plainly. Karen had been having a relationship behind my back with Ryan, and it had been going on for years behind our backs. The look on their faces said it all. As expected, my mom's first instinct was to defend Ryan. She shook her head, saying there was no way her son could do something so low, not to his own brother. But I wasn't backing down. I told them both to stay quiet and asked them to let me call Ryan right there, on speaker. I needed to catch him off guard, to get him to show his true self without knowing our parents were listening. When Ryan picked up, I confronted him, told him I knew everything about him and Karen. At first, he denied it. Over and over, Like he thought if he just stuck to the lie long enough, it would go away. But when I told him Karen had already admitted to everything, his story changed. He started blaming her, called her names, said she was the one at fault. He even had the nerve to say it wasn't his responsibility if women found him attractive, that he was the better-looking brother anyway. I stayed calm, told him straight up that I planned to expose the whole truth. Ryan just laughed and said nobody would believe me, that he was the golden child, after all. That's when I smiled and thanked him for confirming it, because our parents had just heard every word. Ryan froze. You could hear the panic creeping into his voice as he tried to backtrack, fumbling over his own excuses. My mom, still in shock, finally spoke up. She demanded to know what the hell was going on. Ryan tried to explain, or rather, tried to twist it into something that didn't make him look so awful. But the damage was already done. I watched my mom's face shift. The same woman who defended him no matter what now looked at him with a mix of anger and heartbreak. For years, she'd stood between us, protecting him while I was left out in the cold. But now, the truth was out, and she couldn't unhear it. In that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: vindication. After everything I had been put through, the years of silence, cruelty, and betrayal, Ryan was finally the one under the spotlight. His mask had slipped, and everyone could finally see what I had lived with all along. Then my dad, who rarely showed strong emotion, asked me to hand him the phone. And when he started talking, his voice carried a weight I'd never heard before. "Ryan," he said, his tone sharp and cold, "what you've done isn't just a betrayal against your brother, it's a betrayal against this entire family. You was involved with your brother's wife, and you kept doing it, even after they were married. Actions have consequences," my dad said, "and you've irreversibly damaged the trust we had in you. I raised both of you to value family, loyalty, and decency," he continued. "What you've done today goes against everything I tried to instill in you." He paused for a moment, letting the weight of his words settle over Ryan. "The way you disregarded your brother's feelings, the complete lack of respect for the sanctity of his marriage, it's unacceptable. You didn't just hurt him. You've damaged the very foundation that holds this family together." Then he added something that cut even deeper. "Your mother and I, maybe we're to blame for the way you turned out. We enabled you for too long, but that ends now. We're not letting you get away with this anymore." My dad took a breath, then delivered the blow. "Starting today, I'm cutting you off from the college fund I set up for you. You'll need to figure out how to pay for your own university fees. I'm also done financing your lifestyle. If you think being a man means sleeping with married women, then let's see how far you get without my money backing you." I stayed quiet through it all. At first, I wanted to scream at Ryan, but watching my dad finally hold him accountable was all the vindication I needed. I had exposed Ryan's true character, and he clearly hadn't expected the consequences to hit this hard. Ryan, still trying to save face, kept protesting, trying to justify himself. But my father wasn't having it. He ended the call mid-sentence, shutting down any further excuses. Then my mom walked over and hugged me. It had been a long time since we'd had a moment like that. But in that embrace, there was understanding, support, maybe even remorse. She quietly apologized, saying she was sorry for not believing me all these years. And right then, I thought of my 16-year-old self, the kid who used to cry in silence, desperate to be heard. He would have never imagined that one day he'd be standing there, finally believed and embraced by the very person who used to dismiss him. After that, my dad helped me get in touch with a good divorce lawyer. Karen and her attorney tried to go dirty, demanding alimony since I made more than her. Thankfully, the relationship behind my back tipped things in my favor. We also did a paternity test for my son. And yes, it confirmed Ryan was the biological father. I can't put into words how much that crushed me. It was more painful than the moment Karen admitted to the betrayal. I had poured so much of myself into that child, every hour, every memory, only to find out he wasn't mine. I was furious, heartbroken, but somehow I held it together. Karen begged me to still visit him, saying he shouldn't be punished for what happened. But I couldn't. Every time I looked at him, all I could see was Ryan. And I hated that. Once the divorce was finalized, I moved into my own place. It was surreal at first. I had gotten married so young that I'd never really lived alone. But I'd always been independent, so the adjustment came naturally. And honestly, I loved it. Then, just 2 weeks ago, my dad called me. He said he'd been thinking of changing his will. He didn't want Ryan to get anything. And if there's one thing you need to know about my dad, it's that once he makes up his mind, there's no going back. He meant it. He was completely done with Ryan, and true to his word, he followed through. Ryan eventually tried to reach out to our parents. He even showed up at their doorstep, begging them to forgive him. But they didn't even let him inside. My mom, who used to cave in every time Ryan threw one of his tantrums, seemed to have finally had enough. And while I know it must have hurt her more than she let on, she didn't budge this time. Through it all, Ryan never once reached out to me to apologize for what he did. Not a single text. That told me everything I needed to know. He didn't feel guilty about the betrayal. He was just upset about being cut off from the family. Dad told me later that he was planning to leave everything to me. Every asset, retirement fund, life insurance policy, the full inheritance, would go to me. Just to be sure Ryan wouldn't contest it, he said he'd leave him exactly $10. I remember my eyes widening when he said that. My dad had worked hard his whole life, and everything he owned added up to nearly $3 million. The only condition in his will was that if he passed before my mom, she'd still have the right to live in the house, even though it would officially belong to me. Of course, I had no problem with that. I'd want to take care of her no matter what. Somehow, Ryan found out about all this. Since he couldn't get through to our parents, he called me yesterday. For the first time in ages, he tried to patch things up. He told me he was struggling with college, that after Karen found out the paternity test confirmed he was the father, she had started hounding him for child support. He said he was broke, couldn't find a job, and was trying to pick up part-time work. Then he asked me to help, said we should start fresh, and that he really needed me. I laughed. I told him I was completely done with him, that he should have thought about all this before sleeping with my wife and getting her pregnant. He started arguing that I was being unfair, that Karen was just as responsible. I agreed with him. And then I reminded him I divorced her. She's his problem now, not mine. So if she's bugging him about money or parenting, that's on him. Actions have consequences. Ryan started to get worked up, raising his voice, but I cut him off. I reminded him that he was no longer the golden child. He was the black sheep now. The guy who was involved with his own brother's wife. That's when he broke. He started crying, really crying. Said everyone had turned against him, even our grandparents and relatives. And while I knew that was true, it wasn't my problem anymore. I told him we were done, that he was no longer my brother. And I told him not to call me again. Since that call, I've replayed the conversation over and over in my head. As much as I hate him for what he did, I'll admit, hearing him that broken did hit something inside me. I hadn't heard him cry since we were kids. And yeah, it hurt a little. So I guess that's why I'm here, wondering if I should talk to my parents about him, or would I be a complete jerk if I didn't?